Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Parent Academy, supporting Ruler at Home. This is take two of our Parent Academy as our original recording did not work. So for those of you joining us for the first time, welcome. For those of you rewatching this, I hope I am as effective and charming as I was the first time. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Mike Biggan. I am the Director of Guidance here in the Ramsey Public Schools. I've been here in Ramsey for 14 of the last 16 years. I started my career as a school counselor here in the Ramsey Public Schools at the high school, left for a brief time to become director elsewhere, and am now celebrating my 10th year as director here in the district. Prior to becoming a school counselor, I did teach for 7 years in Catholic elementary schools, first on the west side of Chicago and later in Harlem, New York City. In terms of my ruler-specific training, I was fortunate enough to attend one of the last in-person ruler trainings at the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence back in October of 2019. I was embedded with the Hubbard School team as we began our rollout in earnest with the K-8 school district, K-8 schools here in the district. And I've been assisting the principals who've done a tremendous job implementing Ruler in the K-8 buildings. Shout out to Kathy Pina, Gina Aliano, and Molly Dinning. Thank you for all your efforts. And perhaps, most importantly, for tonight's presentation, I am the proud father of 3 children. I have a 16-year-old daughter who's a sophomore in high school, a 13-year-old son who's in the 7th grade, and a soon-to-be 10-year-old son in the 4th grade. And in the interest of full disclosure, I am a true believer in the ruler approach. I do use it both professionally and at home to help my kids. And so I come, not only with the experience that you've heard me detail here today professionally, but also personally as a father, I've used this approach, to help my kids grow in emotional intelligence. Big picture, now, more than ever in light of all the challenges that the COVID pandemic has had, on our children. I think, our conversation about attending to the social and emotional development of our children is more important than ever. I think there's been a lot of conversation about learning loss in the popular media. And while I do agree that we've had to make up some ground in the classroom in certain academic disciplines, it is in the interactions that our children have had with their peers in the school setting that have probably been the greatest loss. And so, as we kind of refocus, and hopefully in these endemic times on helping our kids, overcome these really difficult 23 months, I think part of what we need to focus on is making up some of that ground with some of our, interactions with our peers and with one another. So with that, I'm going to give you a quick little overview of this presentation. That was our introduction. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Ramsey's approach to SEL and Ruler on a larger scale. We're going to talk a little bit about what emotional intelligence is, what its applications are, what its limitations might be, and then we'll get into the meat and potatoes about what the Ruler tools actually are and how you can use this in family practice to enhance your children's experience. So, to begin, I'd like to invite you, and I did on our original recording back in early February, to imagine the following question. So if you could just kind of play along with us here, I'd like you to think for a moment, if there were, if you had a magic wand and you could impart one skill or set of skills or certain traits or characteristics into your children with that magic wand, what would you want to see our children of today develop? What skills, traits, and characteristics do you think will help them, be the most successful in the rest of their life? And so during our presentation, I invited the 70 or so participants to give me their feedback in the form of an activity called the Mentimeter. And I'm going to share with you what their answers were right now. And so this bear with me while this loads. This was a little bit of what um, the people in the original audience said. And I don't know if this mirrors what you might have said, but you'll notice with this word wall, what happens is the words that get repeated the most are the words that are largest on this picture. And you also see around the periphery things that might have been represented once or twice in different parents' answers. And you'll notice that there are some pretty great themes that pop up in here. Things like empathy, resilience, kindness, confidence, perseverance, etc. I think what this illustrates for us is that most of us, when we think about our children and what we think is most important for their development into their adulthood, when we think about what those skills might be, they're not really academic skills, which isn't to say that mathematics instruction and learning to love to read and write aren't important. When we think about what we'd like to see our kids embody into adulthood, oftentimes they're skills in the areas that will help kind of build a solid foundation for a productive life outside the classroom. So things like respect, responsibility, self-confidence. These help us endure adversity. We know this. It helps us solve complex problems. They help us develop meaningful relationships through kindness, through teamwork, the ability to control ourselves. And I think what's satisfying to know in that context is that these same ideas are ideas that are reflected in the values that we've collected from the community when we developed our profile of a Ramsey graduate. This pyramid, which you're probably familiar with because it's basically everywhere in our buildings, was a collaborative enterprise where we solicited feedback from not only teachers and students within our district and administrators in our district, but also our parents. And when we interviewed our stakeholders, the themes that came out as things that we wanted to see our graduates embody are things like empathy, adaptability, responsibility, etc., that build on those building blocks of some of those academic abilities and the 4 C's and critical thinking, communication, and collaboration. It's these soft skills that form the backbone of our POG are also the backbone of what we often refer to as social emotional learning. They were reflected in the feedback that we got from our various stakeholders throughout our community, because they do reflect in large part the values of the Ramsey community. I think it's important to emphasize. And social emotional learning, it does mean a specific thing, this is a definition that came from the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, or CASEL, which is the leader in researching best practices and evidence-based practices in social emotional learning. What they say social emotional learning is, it's the process through which children and adults understand and manage emotions, set and achieve positive goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain positive relationships, and make responsible decisions. And again, when you look at this definition, you kind of see the language that's reflected in our profile of a Ramsey graduate. The idea of being able to reflect, the idea of being able to self-regulate, the idea of having empathy, being self-directed, making responsible decisions. These are all things that are in our profile of a Ramsey graduate and form the backbone of what is commonly referred to as social and emotional learning. Now, social emotional learning has been around for a long time. CASEL's a newer organization developed in the 90s, but when I was in school, there were all sorts of character education programs. But what CASEL set out to do was to define a framework for what social emotional learning could look like, and they came up with these 5 discrete skills of self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. If you look at this image, you'll see that those concepts form the middle circle of the social and emotional framework. But I'd like to direct your attention to the outside rings, and you'll notice that what this framework acknowledges is that social emotional learning doesn't just occur in the classroom or in schools, but it reflects, in our communities, and it's an interaction of both what occurs in our schools and at home and in our community more largely. They interact with one another. And this framework was adopted in the 90s, but just as recently as 2015, 2017, New Jersey adopted social emotional learning competencies and subcompetencies, and this expectation of the Department of Education that we make social emotional learning part of what we teach in schools. Ruler was actually adopted at the Dater School in 2015 under the leadership of our Director of Curriculum and Instruction, Andrew Matteo. So we actually even predate, our relationship with Ruler predates the New Jersey SEL competencies and subcompetencies. We've gradually rolled this out throughout all our elementary schools. And I think one of the things that, I think as parents I'd like to emphasize is that, social emotional learning is, something that, we can't help but teach. So sometimes when I talk to teachers about this initiative of SEL and Ruler, there's a feeling that this is, something else that is being added to their plates as educators. But the truth is, social emotional learning, whether or not we are deliberate and conscious about teaching it, it is taught one way or the other by our example, by the behaviors that we model, by the behaviors we tolerate among one another. And so, another way of thinking about social emotional learning is that it is the plate upon which all learning takes place. It's the embedded conditions for learning that we establish in our classroom norms, in our procedures, and our overall culture. And it's also those same norms that we establish in our home and that we tolerate across our community. When I was a kid, I was often told by my parents, when I caught them doing something maybe that they didn't want me to do, they would say, "Do as I say, not as I do." But the truth is, the way that we learn from others, especially, through our role models, is exactly the opposite. It's the modeling that we get from people that that influences us, quite greatly. And so this is a little image I found on Twitter, which I thought was helpful through this lens of social emotional learning. Things like that is a reminder of how our children pick up cues from us. So, how we handle mistakes, how we deal with frustration, how we solve problems, how we take care of ourselves, how we apologize and repair, how we ask for help. All of these things are ways that we model social emotional learning for our children. In putting this presentation together, I was reminded of a story of my daughter, who now is, like I said, at the start, a high school sophomore. When she was in the 6th grade, my daughter, we got a phone call home from her band teacher. And, it's never great when you get a phone call home from the school. But we were told that she was pretty distracted during her band lesson, and when our ensembles were getting together, instead of staying with the group, she was doing other classwork, and she had been reminded multiple times not to do that, and we spoke to her about it, and then we got a follow-up email that says she was still doing it. So my wife initially had spoken to my daughter the first time that she had stepped out of line, and then when she got the email, as you might be able to imagine, she was completely beside herself. So she asked me if I would speak to her, and so I said, of course, that I'm happy to do that. And so my wife and I sat down with my daughter, and I started to speak to her about the behavior that we found to be unacceptable. And as 6th graders, if you have one in your home, you might be able to relate this, or want to do. My daughter got that glazed look in her eyes and made a couple comments that induced a rolling of the eyes, and as she communicated more and more disrespect to me as I was talking to her, I found myself getting angrier and angrier with her until the whole quote unquote conversation broke down to me yelling and raising my voice at her and and saying some not very nice things about her. And I basically had an adult temper tantrum and sent her to her room crying. And my wife looked at me and was like, well, that'll be the last time I have you do that for me, because if that's what you're going to do, I could have done that as well. It's funny now, but at the time, I felt badly about how I handled the situation. And after I calmed down, I went upstairs and I went to my daughter's room, and I apologized for the way I reacted and the way I threw a temper tantrum, basically a grown-up temper tantrum, and told her that's not the way I wanted to talk to her or the way she deserved to be talked to. And then I proceeded to remind her that similarly, that's not the way I want her to behave in school. That's not the expectations of this house. And I lost my temper because I was disappointed in her and the way I perceived her to be treating me, but I didn't. I expected her to behave better in the future. And so, in that way, I modeled that mistake. I modeled apologizing. I modeled repairing whatever damage I had done. And, I'm not saying every moment since then has been, a perfect moment parenting from then on out. But I have seen my daughter account for her own behavior in the house, apologize when she misbehaves or treats someone rudely, particularly her mother and me. And I can't help but think that it's, that example of that I said and my wife has said in other times that taught her that this is how we treat the people that we love and one another. In the aftermath of that event and others, my wife and I will often joke, and I'll say, one of the problems that the kids have is they have half our DNA, and so, when they misbehave, it's in part because we once misbehaved, and it's not simply that the kids need to do as I say, not as I do, because they have half my DNA. So they're not only are they predisposed to behave the way I behave, but if I model behavior that isn't positive, I'm reinforcing that through the environment that we're raising our children in. So we need to be mindful about that as we kind of move forward in life. And I think that's an important lesson that the children have taught me. So with that, I would go into a little bit of a big picture overview of what emotional intelligence is. Emotional intelligence provides a framework for understanding the role of our emotions, the information we have and can gain from our emotions, and our ability to manage our emotions. It also includes the importance of using these skills, not just to having or knowing about them in daily life, and having the emotional strategies we need to achieve our goals. In other words, it's about being smart about our emotions. I think it's important to note that while emotional intelligence is something and it is relevant, it's not everything, and it's not always the most important thing, but it is a muscle, and it's worth developing because it helps us identify and manage our emotions, particularly in those difficult situations, and particularly in our important relationships. And what the research has shown by partnering with Ruler and the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, we are the beneficiaries of working with esteemed psychologists who have researched the impact of emotions. What we know is that emotions do matter, that they do have an impact on any number of things, whether that's attention, decision-making, the quality of our relationships, our physical and our mental health. They have the power of impacting all of these things. So, if you're suspicious of that statement, I would just invite you to just think about your own self. And have you ever tried to pay attention in a time when you were feeling especially anxious or when you were having a really stressful experience? What was that like? When you were feeling stressed out and you were trying to pay attention to a conversation, or even something less important like a movie when you're under like a lot of stress. You ever had that kind of blank out moment? As I certainly have. Or have you ever made a bad decision and about how to handle a conversation like the one I described about my daughter, because you were having a really powerful emotion, and then after you made that decision or you acted a certain way, you immediately had regret, or after sleeping on it, you woke up in the morning and regretted acting out in an emotional state. because I certainly have, and I think our adolescents and our children certainly have. Have you ever said anything uh, to someone that you love when maybe you weren't of the clearest mind? Um, have you ever found that the way you've talked to someone has impacted an important relationship, a friendship, a relationship at work? Um, have you ever had a moment where you were so under so much stress and had so much anxiety over something that you actually made yourself physically ill? Did your stomach get upset? Did you have a headache from the stress of life experience? Because certainly, I can relate to that. Um, so there's tons of research that the Yale Center of Emotional Intelligence have conducted on all these things, and what we know is powerful emotions can impact us in many ways, and so that's true at home, it's true in our personal life, and certainly true for our children in the classroom, and for the adults in the building who are doing the work. So what I'd like to do now is just to have you kind of do a visualization with me, if you don't mind. So I'd like you to pick a day this week or recently. Just try to remember a recent day in your life. And if you're comfortable, I'd like you to close your eyes. If not, just soften your gaze. Bring attention to that day that you're reimagining. And I'd like you to just imagine first waking up in the morning. How did you feel that day? And as you kind of move through the morning, getting yourself dressed and putting yourself together, whether you're making breakfast for yourself or your children, did you feel rushed? Did you have to skip it? So you're working your way through the morning routine, getting your child dressed, ready for the bus, into your car, off to school. How are you feeling through that morning routine? And if you work outside of your home, how did you feel during the commute? Or as everyone leaves your home, you transition from drop off or getting your child off in the morning into your work requirements. And you're starting your work either in the home or outside the home, meetings, any work relationships, responsibilities you have to attend to while the kids are at school. How do you feel? And then as the day ends and it's time for you to come home from work, it's after school, children come home or you come through the door, and it's time to get ready for the afternoon activities or prepare dinner, or make dinner plans, or shuttle your child to and from their after school activities, their sports, other errands. The day's winding down, but you have to get food on the table. How do you feel? What's the experience of helping your child get organized for their homework? Now it's after dinner. You have to get ready for the next day, get your child bathed, get them ready for bedtime, whether that's bedtime stories, telling them to get off their phones if they're older, get in the shower, brush their teeth. How are you feeling now as the day ends? Are you feeling tired, burned out, rejuvenated, excited for the next day? What are the emotions that you're going through, both yourself and in your home? Now it's just before bedtime for yourself. You're about to shut it down for the evening. How do you feel as your day comes to a close? The truth is, most of us, as we kind of go through an entire day, we go through a myriad of emotions. Some research suggests that the average person can have up to 400 or 500 emotions in a single day, if you were to catalog every moment of every day. And if that's how we feel as adults, we certainly can imagine our children feel the same way as they matriculate from their home to school through their activities each and every day. And one of the challenges that children have is they lack the emotional vocabulary to describe what they live through. So sometimes they struggle to recognize in themselves what they're even experiencing, let alone regulate them. They have a hard time recognizing the feelings in you as their parent or in their friends. So, part of what our goal when we talk about ruler and emotional intelligence is kind of helping our children develop the vocabulary, implement healthy strategies to maintain positive feelings and regulate difficult emotions throughout the day. And so part of when we talk about emotional intelligence, that's what we're talking about as well. The other fact is that learning in a school setting, it is social and it is emotional. As I said before, it is the social emotional learning is the place, the context in which our children learn. So when it comes down to it, learning in a school setting really is a social emotional enterprise. And so the academic skills of reading, writing, and math are completely intertwined with our emotions. And research is clear that our ability to effectively manage emotions is essential for student engagement in all grades, from early elementary school through college, and performance, in the workplace and beyond. So one of the things that the research has shown is that when students have a positive outlook, they are most ready to learn. And this is one of the anchor tools that we teach our kids about in Ruler. And this is called the mood meter. And what the mood meter does is it asks students to plot their emotions on an XY axis. And so on the vertical axis, it's about how much energy does the emotion carry. And then on the horizontal axis, it's how pleasant is the feeling. So something that you would see in the dark blue in the lower left-hand corner would be really unpleasant in the low energy feeling or mood. And so something like real sadness or depression would be in that lower left-hand corner, while in the upper right-hand corner, the dark yellow would be a really high energy, really pleasant. It's kind of like ecstasy, like really high level of excitement in the upper right-hand corner. And what the research has shown is that students actually perform better in this space that Ruler likes to call joyful effort. That sort of moderately to pleasant headspace that is sort of neutral energy. Some people might like to have a little bit more energy. Some people might be a little more chill. But in that space, we know that students kind of perform best in that space. And so certainly from an academic perspective, teaching our children to be able to regulate emotions when they're not in this space, or to maintain emotions when they are in this space, it helps optimize academic performance. So to give you a little bit more background on Ruler. Ruler, like I said before, was developed by the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. We adopted it in 2015 at Dater. We invited Dr. Mark Brackett, who's the executive director at Yale for the Center for Emotional Intelligence and the author of our One Book, One Community Parent Academy in 2019, Permission to Feel. And he came and spoke to our teachers. He spoke to our parents. And then we implemented and actually, Dr. Brackett is also a member on the board of CASEL, the Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning. And we implemented this school-wide in the K-5 buildings in the 2020-21 school year. And this school year, we're rolling it out in 6-12 as an adult SEL program. In Ruler, there are other social emotional learning programs. Ruler kind of likes to say that they are an approach and not a program, although they do have curriculum tools. But it's, if we're being honest, it's not the only approach to SEL. It's just the one that we think is helpful to have a common language across our buildings to help our kids develop skills. And one of the things that Ruler says about emotional intelligence is, they encourage us to be emotion scientists rather than emotion judges. And what does the scientists do? They look at data. They treat emotions as data, and they try to understand better what emotions we're experiencing and what emotions are doing to us, and how they can enhance, our lives as students and outside of school. So. Again, the intent of Ruler is to teach the skills of emotional intelligence to everyone in the school, teachers and parents alike, and students alike. It's intended to be infused in the immune system of the school, so it helps us when we're sort of at our worst, as well as helps us maintain good feelings when we're at our best. And research has shown that Ruler can reduce problem behavior, it can promote positive relationships, and it can improve academic achievement. So I thought I'd share with you what Dr. Brackett promotional video that they put together for Yale themselves in their own words. So here we go.
Ruler makes our school a better place.
I feel that Ruler has helped me because I'm able to show who I really am. I think after having Ruler come in, I've grown so confident and just like what I've always seen myself to be.
Ruler asserts that all emotions matter. All emotions. It's the full range of emotions that makes us human, and it's the full range of emotions that helps us to get through life. Ruler is a systemic approach to social and emotional learning. We want to give school districts the opportunity to build a common language for social and emotional learning.
You need a feeling, or else you can't cooperate, you can't communicate, and you can't really do anything. If you were mad, you can't talk about being mad and be calm.
Too many kids are holding it all in, and we're seeing a rise in anxiety and stress in children that doesn't need to be there.
They're really thinking about cyberbullying and body shaming as opposed to academics.
If we are all working together on our social emotional language, we are making the school a safer, more caring, and joyful place to be for all children.
Research shows that kids who go through this kind of training are less stressed. They do have less depression.
Students are having better conversations with each other. Discipline incidents have decreased. Students are able to be more creative. It really supports the development of the whole child in every way.
Ruler is a set of 5 key skills that are the underlying skills of emotional intelligence: recognizing, understanding, labeling, expressing, regulating emotions. We use a set of anchor tools to help people build greater self-awareness, to build a better emotional vocabulary.
The tools have helped make our students more aware of their classmates.
We're trying to give everyone the opportunity to become more emotionally skilled.
Try to empathize with the other character as well. How do you think the other person felt? And how did the other person show and handle their feelings?
Ruler begins by training the adults in schools to shift their mindsets around the value and importance of emotions.
Just teaching them the ruler skills and the anchor tools and using it in everything we did with each other.
Because educators, like kids, come from many different places. And so really getting them to take a look and reflect upon their own practices. What are they doing and how do they resolve the issues that they are feeling within?
We really are investing in making sure that all of the adults are all embracing this approach so that every student can be successful.
With this, you're going to be able to teach.
We also work with families because we want children and their parents or caretakers to have the same language.
There's no doubt that the ruler approach allows for enhanced learning.
This is an approach that is for everyone. It helps everyone learn strategies to help them manage their lives so they can be healthier, happier, and more effective. My real hope is that every school would embed these principles into the way leaders lead, teachers teach, and students learn.
Well, I love that video. And I think one of the things that, I've come to believe is that, as I have personally practiced and tried to improve my own skills, I have found that it has a positive effect, on me, on my relationships and my way to manage work, my friendships, my family. And, the more that I've been able to practice some of these skills of emotional intelligence for myself in my daily life, the easier it is for me to model it for my kids. And so ultimately, I do think it has the impact of being able to influence who we are, who I am as an individual, who we are as a family. So what are the ruler tools? They're just 4 of them. We went over the mood meter. The mood meter, it's a self and social awareness tool. that we can use to better recognize, understand, and label our own emotions and those of others. And we also use the mood meter for emotion regulation strategies, namely being able to identify an emotion allows us then to figure out how we like to regulate it. There's a great story in Permission to Feel where the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence was trying to investigate why were Yale students so incredibly stressed out. And I'll speak more to that in a bit. And what they discovered was people were mislabeling their feelings, and so it's difficult to intervene. So I'll speak more to that in just a moment. The charter is something that you could do as a family. We do that in the classroom. We've done that with our staff, where it just invites us to ask ourselves, how do we want to feel together in the classroom? How do you want to feel together as in teaching teams? You can do this is how you want to feel together at home in your as a family. And it's an agreement that a group makes about how they would like to treat one another. A meta moment is really a pause. It's a process for extending the time between an experience of an intense emotion and how we respond to that emotion, recognizing that we have a choice when we have a powerful emotion of how we'd like to respond. And what we invite kids to do is imagine their best selves and how would the best version of themselves respond to this powerful emotion, and try to draw strength from that example. And then the blueprint helps us solve problems and conflicts in difficult situations between peers through questions that prompt self-reflection, empathy, and perspective taking. So it's a very simple set of tools that we teach. Like I said earlier, we infuse ruler in the classroom, and so that it's part of what I call our immune system. So these skills and tools, by being infused in the school experience and practiced through core routines, they help us. We're given adaptive and repeatable activities that we can practice during the day or a weekly class, and link it to academic instruction. So these routines are taught and practiced in ways that are developmentally appropriate across the K-12 disciplines. And then what is ruler? Well, ruler is an acronym. So it stands for recognizing, understanding, labeling, expressing, and regulating. So I'd like to unpack that a little bit for you today, so you can walk away a little bit of better understanding. So the R is for recognizing. And so in recognizing emotions, we want to recognize them in ourselves and others by thinking about facial expressions, body language, tone of voice, all those nonverbal cues. And so as a parent, you can encourage this by paying attention to the emotions in yourself and in your child. And you can point out how that some of those nonverbal cues communicate emotions. So if you have elementary or middle school kids, that beautiful Pixar movie Inside Out, it's a Pixar, Disney movie, Inside Out for sure, talks a little bit about that. And then the thing to be mindful of is, the emotion expression and norms, they do vary from culture to culture. So there's a lot of similarities across cultures, but some cultures express emotions slightly differently, and recognizing that is valuable. One of the things I do as a dad is I help coach my son's travel basketball team. And my son's 13, and if you have a 13-year-old son, then you know that it's a terrible age to be a boy in a lot of ways. And one of the ways that's terrible is that boys are really mean to each other in this age. Probably started towards the end of 6th grade in my house. I observed it, and this year's been pretty rough. And my son's fortunate, and his basketball team's pretty good, and they win a lot of games. And sometimes when we're winning, the boys can be really rude to the opposing team. And so I'll take the time to kind of when I'm on the bench to remind the kids, while it's great to win, it really sucks to lose. And when we lose, we feel bad. And just kind of be respectful, of other people by the way we, kind of act and kind of win with grace, lose with dignity. So those are things I try to point out when I see. So there's something we can do, and I will point out to the sad team over there, hey, how do you think it makes them feel when you carry on like you are right now? How would you feel if the shoe were on the other foot? But a simple little tip like that, I'm not like the everyone's favorite coach in that moment, but it is a helpful thing to remind my child who doesn't intuitively want to hurt anybody, but isn't necessarily aware of other people's emotions at all times because of his developmental age. The U in ruler stands for understanding emotions. And understanding really means knowing what might some of the causes of emotions be and how they can influence the way we think and the decisions we make. So, particularly, this is a good thing to remember about, being an emotional scientist and not a judge, to kind of ask questions about, why a child is having an emotion or what that emotion is better than labeling and judging that without the child's input. So, in the moment, like I described with my daughter, like when you haven't been your best self, you can acknowledge, hey, I had a bad day. I got upset because of this or that. And that's why I behave that way. It's not okay, but I'm sorry. Those types of things are really powerful. We can best understand emotions in ourselves and others by asking questions and trying to learn more. Everyone wants to be understood. And when someone can correctly label your emotion, particularly when you're having a difficult day, it does have the effect of lightening the powerful feeling, and it does have the effect of feeling understood helps us feel better. So when we can ask questions and get to the root of it in our children, it is a good way to kind of build empathy and build that relationship. Labeling emotions is the L, so that's connecting an emotional experience to specific words to describe it. There's power in naming an emotion. Like I said earlier, it's great when you can name the experience of someone else. That makes them feel understood. But also in our own emotions, be able to correctly name it gives us the ability to then decide, is this an emotion that we want to sustain or one that we want to interrupt with a management strategy? And I alluded to the Yale study earlier in stressed out college students. And the feeling was kids were feeling stressed out by the workload and the kind of competitive nature of being at Yale, a high achieving school. But the truth was, as the Yale psychologists studied this emotion, they found that it wasn't really stress that kids were feeling, but really it was envy. And a certain kind of jealousy and that social comparison can bring about was leading students to feel badly. And they called it stress, but really what they were experiencing was envy. And you understand why this could be a problem. The labeling can be a problem, because if you're feeling stressed out, I don't know what your coping mechanisms are. My healthier ones might be to go for a walk with the dog, by myself, with my wife, be deliberate about spending time with people that I love, my family, my friends. On a bad day, it might be wine. Wine might help me, when I'm feeling stressed out. But those aren't really effective strategies for envy. When one's feeling envious, strategies that work are gratitude, altruism, acts of charity, counting our blessings. Envy can be combated by those strategies. Walking the dog isn't going to make me feel any less envious about my neighbors. In fact, it might make me feel worse, because I'll look at my neighbor's house and realize they have a nicer house than I do. I might feel bad about that. So knowing how to label your emotion appropriately, understanding the emotion, can be a very, really powerful thing. So then in terms of expressing emotions, E is in rulers for expressing our emotions. Knowing how and when to display or show our emotions, depending on who we are with, where we are, and what we are doing. And here's an important thing, especially with younger kids, actually all children, but it's never that an emotion is wrong. All emotions are valid. They're all okay. It's not having the feeling that can be a problem, but sometimes it's how we display our feeling or how we act from our feelings that can get us into trouble. So we can validate a bad feeling or a feeling that's making us feel either low energy or making us feel unpleasant, and yet also say, look, we can't really behave in that way. So by modeling how to express difficult feelings in a positive way, that can be really helpful, and also helping your child evaluate what's the appropriateness of how you're displaying this emotion. It's really not okay to carry on in this way in public, in school, in church, wherever, and maybe when you come home, we can have those strong feelings, but, express our feelings that way because, you're cared for here, but we have to be careful about where, how we are expressing it in this context. So, most of us, we care a lot about our children being respectful and communicating in appropriate ways. And, that takes guidance. It's a lesson that we have to learn over time. We need to model it so they can learn how to manage their own emotions in the moments of powerful feelings. And then, encourage them to express their feelings in their best ways. As a caregiver, as a parent or guardian, you might ask yourself, are you expressing your feelings at the best time, in the best place, in the best ways, even to your children? Sometimes at home, we're tired and we're stressed and we let down, and we're not always modeling the best ways of expressing our emotions. So I encourage you to show your children what good emotional expression looks like by how you talk to them and how you talk to others. And then we come to the final of the letters in Ruler, which is the regulating emotions. And learning to regulate or manage our emotions is the premier skill of emotional intelligence. And we really need to have a bank of strategies to use when we're experiencing strong emotions. Strategies for regulating our emotions and the emotions of our children fall into two major categories. There are thought strategies, what we think or say to ourselves, and action strategies, what we do to keep or shift or change how we are feeling. So this is a skill that's developed over the course of our lifetime. It's a process. It takes time and practice. I'm 45 years old now. I think I'm a more mature person than I was when I was 25, and I anticipate being even more mature when I'm 65, or maybe not more mature, but certainly wiser. But to develop skills, like we need to, in others, we need to know the strategies that work best to calm ourselves or to boost our energy and our excitement, depending on the circumstances and our goals. We can help our kids recognize and understand their emotions. That process is known as co-regulation, where we kind of call out the behavior, call out the emotion, and we help them together share those, develop those skills. And that's an important thing to do as a parent until our kids can do those things independently. And just to kind of get a little more into detail, the bottom line is, a thought strategy almost always works as a self-regulation strategy because it happens in our heads. So we can always turn negative self-talk into positive self-talk. We can always try to reframe a situation in a positive way. We can always practice acceptance of a situation. We can, look for the funny in a moment. We can distract ourselves. We can express gratitude. Those are almost always safe. In getting ready for this presentation, I was a little nervous, but I took a moment. I said, you know what? I practiced this. I prepared for this presentation. I can do this. That positive reframing, that positive self-talk kind of is a way to kind of deal with that unpleasant feeling of anxiousness. Action strategies, they're not always in the moment appropriate, and sometimes they're ongoing, but you'll see some of the things that we can do to kind of regulate powerful emotions. This past weekend was beautiful out, and just being outside and going for a walk and doing a little yard work, picking up branches that had fallen over the storm and whatnot, just elevated my mood. It changed. It made me feel better. I felt good to be outside. So those are things that we can do in an ongoing way to kind of help us regulate our emotions and kind of endure the challenges day to day that we all experience in the modern world. And you'll notice that some of these things are sort of, short term, and some of these things are more ongoing. So wrapping up with some things to think about in terms of family practice, again, pay attention to the emotions for yourself and those of you in the family. Feel your feelings, name them, listen, be an emotional scientist, not a judge. Validate kids' feelings. Doesn't mean you can't correct their behavior, but allow your children to feel what they want to feel. Ask questions about those feelings. Choose your responses wisely. Remember that modeling is so important. So not just calling out behavior that you don't like, but also modeling how you handle strong feelings, being honest about the feelings you're having and when it's difficult for you to regulate them. Being willing and open to look at things from a different perspective, sharing different points of view within your family can be healthy. Stay connected with one another. let your children know that you care. In the high school, we like to quote psychologist Carl Rogers, who said, a lot of great things, but among them, encouraged therapists to treat clients with positive regard, non-judgmental positive regard. And his thinking was that, with sufficient support and sufficient guidance, anyone can flourish. And he used the analogy of the plant and the seed. The seed doesn't need perfect soil or the perfect amount of sunlight or the perfect amount of water to grow and flourish. It needs sufficient nutrients in the soil, sufficient sunlight, sufficient rain, sufficient water. So relationships between children and parents, similarly, we don't need to be perfect parents to raise healthy, well-adapted children. We need to be sufficient as parents. We need to care. We need to tend to the garden of our children to allow them to grow in a positive, productive way. And we're allowed to make mistakes. And some of the stuff is hard and is sharpened over a lifetime. So be patient with yourself. Recognize as parents that that modeling imperfection is almost as good as being a great role model, and that we can kind of get through difficult times is a great lesson for children to learn. So I hope you got something out of this presentation. And of course, at any time, if you ever have any questions or ever need support, don't hesitate to reach out to me or any of our school counselors or support staff. I wish you all the best of luck and look forward to hearing from you soon. Take care.